Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. I don't know why I keep forgetting this. I hope you tuned in last night to William Bell and myself on Two Guys in the Bible. We reviewed the debate that I recently had with Tristan Gabriel, and I think if you didn't watch, you need to go back and watch that. William shared some incredible stuff related to one of Tristan Gabriel's major points about the neurological change and all that kind of stuff like that, which of course is not a biblical argument. He made no biblical arguments, but be that as it may, go back and watch last night's program, and do be sure, to tune in tonight to Mike Sullivan and me on preterist apologetics. Mike and I always have a really good time. And, we are continuing our study of the Song of Moses and how it impacts so deeply New Testament eschatology. It's really some good stuff. So join us tonight. That's 6 o'clock Central Time, 7 o'clock Eastern. Okay, so yesterday and Monday, I talked about what does it mean if the final three feast days of Israel, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or Sukkot, what does it mean if those are not fulfilled? What does it mean if they are fulfilled? This is not only an interesting subject, but it is absolutely critically important for the proper understanding of biblical eschatology. Some years ago, as I began to really focus on the significance and the meaning of the feast days of Israel. And I've shared before how a friend of mine, really great friend of mine from several years ago, named Bill Cannengeiser, he used to call me up every single week, sharing with me his insights on the feast days. And Bill was a walking, talking encyclopedia of the significance of the feast days and the relationship to eschatology. Well, Bill kept sharing all of that stuff with me, and I have to confess, a lot of times I wasn't even on board. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting, Bill. I know he got frustrated at me. But sometimes things don't click at the time you hear them. Well, some years, at some point of time during those years, I heard a presentation by David Curtis from Berean Bible Church. And it was on the feast days of Israel and eschatology. And as I said, I've shared this before. David's lesson just absolutely blew me away. I turned to my wife. Now, this has been 20 years ago. I turned to my wife. I said, babe, how have I lived over 50 years and never seen this? I was absolutely embarrassed at my own ignorance. And since that time, I have devoted myself to understanding the importance of Israel's feast days and their correlation with eschatology. Now, I have to tell you, I was raised in an environment, in a theological environment in which Israel's feast days were never discussed in depth. Now, let me explain that a little more carefully. Did preachers point out that Christ is our Passover? 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 6? Yes, they did. Did they talk about the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Unleavened Bread? Seldom, if ever. But did they talk about Pentecost, Feast of First Fruits? Yes, they did. But did they ever talk about, in the context of eschatology, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot? Absolutely, positively, no. I never heard one single lesson. I used to attend lectureships with my father all the time. We used to go to gospel meetings. Sometimes those were 2 weeks long back in the day. Did I ever hear lessons about Israel's feast days and eschatology? Not a peep. And I can tell you this. In many of the amillennial circles, especially those in the fellowship in which I was raised, the Churches of Christ, it is still true today that if you mention the feast days and their critical role in understanding biblical eschatology, people are going to look at you like you are out of your ever-loving mind. Where in the world did you get this? As I started to say, as I was head over heels in my investigation of the feast days, and had started to see the riches, the depth, the beauty of understanding the feast days and their relationship to eschatology, I shared some of my findings with my friend Doug Wilkinson. And he wrote back and told me, Don, I have begun to see the feast days are the Rosetta Stone of eschatology. And I told him, I said, dude, I'm going to steal that. And I've used it many, many times. But I like to give credit where credit is due. And Doug Wilkinson is the one that came up with that terminology. The feast days are the Rosetta Stone of biblical eschatology. What does that mean for the amillennial and the postmillennial world? Now, Monday and Tuesday, I've shared with you how the dispensational world commonly appeals to the feast days. I mean, I can't tell you how strongly the dispensational world relies on their view of the ultimate fulfillment of the last three feast days as the consummation of God's dealing with Israel and the consummation of the eschatological schema found in the Bible. They are on board with that. Unfortunately, they completely ignore, they distort, and you'll just have to excuse the strong language, they pervert the time frame for the fulfillment of the feast days. It is ironic that one noted dispensational writer, speaking of the feast days, said the first four feast days were fulfilled dramatically, on time, just as predicted. Okay, that means they were fulfilled in the first century. But the same writer said, and we are eagerly awaiting their fulfillment at the end of the age. So, as typical dispensational doctrine does, they insert a huge, humongous, 2,000 years so far, gap between the fulfillment of Pentecost and the fulfillment of Rosh Hashanah. Now, they understand Rosh Hashanah is the time of the judgment, the sounding of the trumpet for the judgment. They understand that. But to reiterate, they completely ignore, they distort, they pervert how the New Testament writers put the time of the judgment at the sounding of the trumpet in the first century. They just pervert it. And I don't mean any unkindness, I mean no disrespect whatsoever. If you're a dispensationalist and you're hearing this for the first time, I hope that you'll give it some serious thought. And again, I'm not impugning anyone's integrity or sincerity at all, not even close. But when you have to ignore all of the New Testament testimony about the fulfillment of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Parousia, and Sukkot, in order to maintain your futurist eschatology, there's something wrong. Okay, back to the issue of the amillennialist and the postmillennialist. As I noted yesterday, the dispensationalists, by and large, believe the law of Moses was fulfilled and removed in the first century. The law of Moses is no longer in effect. Well, that sounds great. The trouble of it is, the amillennialist and the postmillennialist believe You got to catch the power of this, folks. They believe the coming of the Lord at the sounding of the trumpet has not yet happened. They believe that the second coming of Christ to bring salvation has not yet happened. They believe that the coming of the Lord to bring salvation for the ingathering and the harvest has not yet happened. Do you see the problem? On the one hand, they affirm the law of Moses has passed away. On the other hand, they say that a vital, fundamental element of the law of Moses, i.e. the last 3 feast days, remains unfulfilled. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but you cannot consistently, biblically make that argument. Paul said, Colossians chapter 2, writing to Gentiles, being pressured to obey the law of Moses after the cross, which is where most amillennialists and most postmillennialists say that the law of Moses was done away with. Hang on to that thought, okay? So amillennialists and postmillennialists say that Colossians chapter 2 has Paul saying that the law of Moses was nailed to the cross. That's not what the text says. Let me urge you to go to my website, donkeypreston.com, and in the search tab or search bar, look up the article by Brother Dallas Burdett on Colossians 2, 16 and 17. He has a marvelous linguistic exegetical discussion of Colossians chapter 2, proving beyond any doubt that Paul did not say the law had passed away or was nailed to the cross. But you see, we know that that's absolutely not true for the following reason. Paul, writing to those Colossian brethren, Gentiles, being pressured to keep the law of Moses, Paul said, let no man judge you in respect of new moon, feast day, or Sabbaths, plural, which is in a present participial form, a shadow of the good things that are about to come. So here is Paul writing in approximately 62, almost 30 years after the cross, saying that the law had not yet passed away. And he specifically says that the law concerning the new moon. Well, what is the new moon? That is distinctively Rosh Hashanah. It was the feast day that was specifically related to the new moon. So Paul says, let no man judge you in respect to new moon feast days. Listen, folks, all of the feast days were, feast days. The final 3 certainly were. There's simply no scriptural justification for saying, the first 4 feast days, those were feast days, but not the last 3. No, that would be a ridiculous, unscriptural argument. And let no man judge you in respect to the Sabbaths. Well, folks, each one of the feast days was a Sabbath. Just read Leviticus 23. As a matter of fact, what's interesting to me is that in Leviticus chapter 23, the Lord made Yom Kippur of equal, I don't know what the right word is, equal value, equal strength, equal importance as the weekly Sabbath. Now, why do I say that? Well, the weekly Sabbath was given, and if any man violated the weekly Sabbath, Saturday, what was supposed to happen to them? They were supposed to be killed. Look at Exodus 16. Look at Exodus chapter 20. So here is God saying that the weekly Sabbath was so important that violation of that day was supposed to lead to death. Well, in Leviticus chapter 23, Yahweh said that if any man observed Yom Kippur improperly, they were to be put to death. So here you have two Sabbaths of equal value, equal importance. And Paul said, don't let any man judge you, in respect of new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths. Well, if someone says, as a Christian, you've got to keep these feast days, they're judging you because they're saying these are mandatory in order to be pleasing to God. Same is true of the seventh-day Sabbath. You cannot exclude the seventh-day Sabbath from the Sabbaths, plural, of Colossians 2:17. You cannot exclude them. You cannot divide them up and say, oh, well, the seventh day is the most important versus the rest of them. No, all of the rest of them are ceremonial. This is moral. No, you can't do that. Remember what I just said about the seventh-day Sabbath and Yom Kippur. But Paul said, when he wrote in Colossians chapter 2, that those feast days, new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths, they still were, when he wrote, shadows, meaning they were types, meaning they were not yet fulfilled. They were shadows of the good things that were, he said, about to come. I've got to develop this, and I'll do this next Monday, of how so many people just deny what Paul said because of tradition that says, no, the law was passed away at the cross. Then how could Paul say that the feast days, the new moons, the feast days, and the Sabbaths were still unfulfilled when he wrote? And folks, this means Sukkot was not fulfilled when he wrote, which means the charismatic gifts were still operative, which is precisely what we see in the pages of the book of Acts. But he said they were about to be fulfilled, meaning the time of the face-to-face, the time of the arrival of that which is perfect, was about to come. Do you follow? Are you tracking? I know it's challenging. Anyway, thanks for joining me for today. Hey, don't forget, join me this Friday. I'm going to be talking about the ashes of the red heifer. You don't want to miss this. This is really honestly good stuff. Okay? And don't forget my 2-book special for the month of August 2025. I can't seem to get a hold of it here. So, like Father, like Son on clouds of glory. Can you believe Jesus said this? Fantastic material. Save yourself about $15. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Order the 2 books. You'll be glad you did. I will see you on Friday.